Okay, everybody got that. So here's a list of the books that I've co-authored. We don't need to spend any time on that. So I want you to think about just a little bit of, you hear a lot about STEM, and STEAM is adding the arts into that, which is a particularly good fit for early childhood, because that's one of the many ways that children in these preschool years can express themselves. So over the next hour and a half, I'm going to be sharing lots of ideas from my own work, from teachers I've worked with over the years, that I hope that you can bring to the children in your programs. I do want to say that the examples and photos are from what we would now call the olden days, when children could actually share materials with each other and work closely together without masks. And so now we know that things are a little bit different. We're at least most of us in actual classrooms and not teaching virtually. So we'll just focus on the possibilities of how we can do all of these things with children. So with STEAM being this interdisciplinary approach of looking across these areas, and I would add that anytime you're working with young children, language and vocabulary are a part of all of that. But it fits really well with the project work and inquiry, learning, and investigations that a lot of you do in your programs. So this quote, STEAM is much more about facilitating inquiry-based thinking and discovery than about teaching facts and giving answers. Hedda Sharapan is with the Fred Rogers Center and was one of the co-authors of the National Association for the Education of Young Children's document on technology in the early years. And so she really is looking at, this is a way for us to do complex thinking with children. So STEM may be a more familiar term. I think it's kind of entertaining that the first pass at coming up with a way of putting these areas together was SMET, S-M-E-T, and then people just sort of thought that sounded funny, and so they changed it to STEM. So why does all of this matter? We're competing with the world. In a sense, we're looking at children in the United States falling behind in science and math and technology. Right now, the Department of Education estimates that only 16% of high school students are interested in a career in STEM. What I find even more sad is over half of the freshmen who enter high school thinking they want a career in a STEM related field lose that interest by the time they graduate from high school. So we don't have the people ready that the world of business is looking for. So let's kind of break down these different components of STEM. So science could be considered finding information through experimentation or observation. So you see in this photograph, this teacher and children using this very complex tool, a paper tube, to enhance their observation skills. So I'd like for all of you to just take a minute, make a tube with your hands, 2 hands, and look through and just kind of look around your room. You have a window, look out the window. And I'd like for you to just take a moment, raise your hand, wave. I've got you back on the screen here. Did you see the value of this tool in helping focus your observation? Did it make you look at things with, so something that simple, just doing this can help you really pay more careful attention to what you're looking at. So when you take the children out for a fall nature walk, doing that and really looking at a squirrel that way is very different than looking at a squirrel. And you can talk about how that's a tool. We've used our hands to be a tool to help us observe. So most of us think about technology as electronic, a digital camera, tablets, computers. But technically, technology is creating something to help us do something. So a bottle opener is technology. It's a simple machine. It's a lever that helps us open a bottle. A digital camera is technology. Both are tools to help us accomplish something. And so I'd encourage you to sort of broaden that view of technology. Then engineering is problem solving or designing solutions. It's something that's unfamiliar to a lot of us. Most of us at some point in our school career had science classes, had science textbooks, did science activities. Most of us did not do much in the area of engineering. And so if you want to do something to promote engineering, let's take this situation where the children are outside and they're doing ramps. And we see the children frustrated and we say, looks like there's a problem. And you say, what's the problem? And they say, our ball keeps bouncing out of the gutter. They're using these vinyl gutters. And then you, being your engineering promoting self, might say, let's think of some ideas and then try them out to see what works. That's you using engineering with children. It's identifying a problem, thinking of some ideas, trying them out, and seeing what works. Mathematics is another field that we're all more comfortable and aware of. When I looked at your survey that you were all doing at the beginning, pretty much, I don't think anybody put engineering as something that they feel really comfortable with, but there was a range among the others that feeling comfortable with technology or feeling comfortable with the arts. I suspect had we done that survey 10 years ago, the people comfortable with technology would have been much lower, but we've all become just much more skilled as technology in terms of the definition of digital technology has just become much more part of our lives, and certainly over the last year and a half it has. So if you think about mathematics as exploring these different quantity, size, relationships, measurements, think about the fact that it can happen anywhere. And I want you, and I'm going to ask you this several times as we go through, to look at the faces on these children. They're so absorbed in their work. They're putting rocks on one side of the balance and they're using these plastic counters to see how many counters will balance out the rock. Another area that I do a lot of work in, I'm not going to talk a lot about today, although I will a little bit later on talk about some more, is children in nature. And one of the things that researchers have discovered is that for some children, they can focus much better outside than in. As one little boy that I worked with said, when I'm outside, the noise in my head goes away. We don't know why, but it might be something to try. And later I'll be sharing some more examples of things that you can do outdoors with children. So then we think about the arts. Typically we think of visual arts, but also include drama, music, dance, movement. These can all open the doors to new ways of thinking. So think about this. let's see, do we have a poll coming up? Or not? Okay, here's what I'd like for you to do.
It's up. I don't know if anybody doesn't see it. People are answering.
Okay, okay. I see the slide that says poll, but I'm not seeing, are we going to see outcome? There we go. So it looks like you're typical of a lot of early childhood educators, that you're really comfortable with the arts. And that's the reason, that one of the things that you really enjoy doing with children. As I said earlier, we've become more comfortable with technology, science, math, engineering, not so much. By the end of this presentation, I think you'll have a higher comfort level with engineering. Okay, can we go on to the next then? Do I need to take that poll down, or do you? Oh, there we go. So interesting things start to happen when you bring what seem to be unrelated things together. So there's this concept. So if we think about the elements of STEAM, where here, I live 20 minutes from the Arch. I'm on the Illinois side of the river, but I can be at the Arch in about 20-25 minutes. So we've got the manufactured world of the Arch, but it was created using all of the elements of STEAM. You think about the mathematics, the science, the technology, the arts, the engineering that had to be a part of that process. So when you bring all of those elements together, that's when some of the magic can happen. There's this phenomenon called the edge effect. And that's the concept that there's the greatest diversity where the edges of habitats come together. So here we have, woodland and water coming together. So where those edges meet, that's where we have the greatest diversity of plants, the greatest diversity of wildlife. And so that same thing sort of happens when we bring the elements of STEAM together. When you bring those elements together, that's when exciting, interesting things kind of begin to happen. And I think you'll see as we go through some of the activities that I'm going to share with you how that works. But first, you were asked to gather a collection of small objects. And so you would get those now. And so here I put together two collections of small objects, one on a piece of paper, one on a piece of wood. So put your objects in front of you like this now. And what I want you to do is sort your collection into groups. And then in the chat, if you would just note how you sorted those things. So I'll give you a minute. By color, by shape, by color, by shape, by function. So kind of our go-to as teachers tends to be by color and shape, hard and soft. All right, so let's pause here. We have by function, by natural materials, by hard, by soft, by color, by shape, where you find them. All right, I want you to put them, well, let's go and see see what I did here. So I sorted mine by, on the left, I did bright colors and dark colors. I did the same thing with this collection. Bright colors, dark colors. So put your materials all back together again. And I want you to sort them in a different way that wasn't mentioned in the chat. And then go ahead and put in the chat how you sorted them. Technology, paper-based, long, short, insect shapes, how often they're used, school items, personal tools, personal and work function. All right, let's stop. Healing and helpful, by size, by length, things to wear, things that hold things, objects with writing, objects without. Okay, you've made the challenge. Put them all back together and sort them in another way. With numbers, sharp, plastic material, found in nature, man-made, float, sink. All right, we're going to do it another time. Multiple pieces, single items. Weight, my objects, my child's objects. Moving parts, no moving parts. Smell and no smell, length, shape of material. Edible, non-edible. Type of material. Okay, we'll pause here. Let's see, get these out of the way. So I did in this final one things that open and close and things that don't. Things that fit into an Altoid box and things that don't. And so I want to ask, and again, we're going to put this in the chat, of when did your brain turn on? The first time you sorted things, the second time you sorted things, the third time you sorted things? When did you feel like you really started thinking? Second, third. And I suspect those who said the second time, it was after they'd already read some things, because we had a pretty good list going after the first sort. So my point here, and some were It's after school. You're having to think the very first time you saw it. And so much of it depends on the collection of objects. But, when was the last time you thought to sort things by what fits in the Altoid box and what doesn't? So if we just do color, size, and shape, which certainly they need, but if that's all we do, we're limiting. That when we add that complexity and help them think in new ways, we're helping them develop that creativity that comes together. It comes when we put things together that we don't typically think of as group togethers. They make connections in new ways. You look here, when's the last time you thought a shout wipe, a rock, and a penny would be in the same group? And that's the beauty of STEAM. It's building connections that otherwise we wouldn't see. So this is a collection of words from notes at a meeting I attended as people were thinking about the value of STEAM. What are things that it encourages? And you look at these words: exploring, encouraging, creativity, negotiating, problem solving, collaboration, diversity. All of those things are things that we want to promote with our children. And so what we're going to do is next look at part of a project that addresses the Illinois Early Learning and Development Standards. So you received an article about it that either you've read or you can read. But we built off the typical marble painting activity that I suspect most of you have done at one time or another. And we focus specifically on the art and science. So one thing I want to make clear is that when we talk about STEAM, you don't have to do all 5 of those things at the same time. You can pick elements and put them together in whatever makes sense. So we looked at the state goal of demonstrates curiosity about the world and begin to use practices of science and engineering to answer questions and solve problems. So we wanted to help children learn to do that in a way that had meaning for them. We wanted them to begin to develop those skills of science and engineering, ask questions, solve problems. Then we looked at these particular benchmarks that are science benchmarks of expressing wonder and curiosity, being able to plan and carry out their own investigations. And then this is the final one is one that we often tend to leave out. It's how you document what you learned, what you collect, you describe, you compare, you record that information so that you can know what you learn and you can share what you learned with others. That's what scientists do when they write an article for a publication or present at a conference. That's what children do when they pull that information and say, look what I now know. So we wanted them to gain exposure to the arts, to investigate, appreciate, and participate in the arts. So here's a marble painting like many of you have seen before. We wanted them to use visual art materials. So how does this translate into what children are actually doing? They're using real materials and real ways to figure things out. They can share what they find out, and that's something that we too often leave out. And I'm going to be sharing with you a variety of ways that the children can share what they learn. And that they can explore a variety of materials to create art. So those are our goals. So we looked at the science concept of changing the amount or direction of a force results in a change of motion. And so children say you can make the marble go fast, you can make it go slow, you can make it go in different directions. We're looking at force and motion. So what you see in quotes and in blue is what the children actually said. That and I love this picture because he's so focused, but he looks like he's about to eat the box. So this was day one. The child could say, you put in a piece of paper, put a marble in it, roll it, you hold the box and move it. A child could describe something. Too often, that's where we stop with an experience for children. And this is kind of a soapbox moment for me, but imagine you're in a craft class and you go to the community center, and the first day you get there and they talk about making something out of stained glass. You get pretty excited about it. You go home and start thinking about what you could make, thinking about the design, and you go back the next week and they say, oh, we're doing knitting. And so you kind of go, okay, I could do something with knitting. And you start thinking about what you could make and what would be fun to make for yourself or to give to somebody. And you go back the next week and it's, oh, we're doing woodworking. What we're doing unintentionally is subtly teaching children to be satisfied with incompetence. We do that when we have a new song every week that the children don't ever quite learn the words to, and you can only remember the words to when you're looking at a card. We do that when we switch from activity to activity so that children never really gain mastery. Instead, if you allow them to repeat something over time, they gain the mastery, the confidence that goes with it. They learn that persistence pays off and that they can get better at something. You can see from his words, he knows exactly how to do this and how to teach somebody else to do it. So here's what it looks like when you do that on day one. Here's what it looks like on day 5 when you're experimenting with different types of paint. You're using different kinds of tools, thicker paint. You can clearly see there's that back and forth motion, and children can look at that and tell that mostly they went back and forth, but look at these lines here that went in a different direction. I wonder how they did that. Here's day 5 or day 9. So consider just what that looks like. It looks like a fine art Monet painting or something to me. It creates this rich activity over time that doesn't happen if you just do that one day. And so, I urge you to think about that as you plan activities and share them with children. So here you can see from this language sample, you can use that to assess. They're making observations. It makes all those lines where the ball rolls. They know that they can use the paint lines to track where the ball went. They know the message that those lines convey. So I'm going to pause a minute here and talk about how important it is for children to learn to pay attention to details. A chair is a chair, whether it's right side up or upside down, but a B or a P or a D, lowercase, are all different depending on the position. It takes observation and attention to detail for children to know that. So I did a little experiment, and if you've seen me present before, I show these pictures a lot because I think they're pretty profound. This was when I was teaching early childhood special education, and I asked the children to draw grass for me. I suspect if I asked you to draw grass, yours would look a whole lot like Chad's. Here was another little guy who was not as far along the developmental continuum as Chad, but here was his picture of grass. Then I took them out to this little tiny front yard that the school had to actually look at grass. And we went out, sat in the grass, looked at what we saw. I didn't say, remember, pay attention. It was just like, let's see what we see. And we looked at what we saw. When we came back in, I didn't say, now remember everything that we saw. I just said, would you draw grass for me again? And here's Chad's. like this piece, here's that piece, what was yellow and green and brown. And then this is my favorite. He said, um, this was a 4-leaf clover. I didn't really find one. I just wished I did. So that was Chad's. And here was Mike's, that even he is showing that grass wasn't all green, that there were other colors in there. And so just with that simple observation, his drawing changed, his attention to detail changed. So back to our marble painting experience, we asked, how could we make the balls go farther? And the children said we could throw the balls. And so we got those, I think they're called Cush balls, the ones that are the little hairy balls, and Nerf balls, and dip them in paint and let the children throw them at a sheet. And then one of the things that came out of that was they started talking about the point of impact. They could see where the ball hit. Then they said we could get a great big box. And so we did. So again, back to our art, we were using a variety of tools to create art. And this, I wish I had this on video, because it was like they were riding a roller coaster. They were squealing and screaming, it's coming to me, it's coming to me. No, it's going to you, it's going to you. Make it go up, make it go down. And they were moving the box all around, but with control. And they knew what was going to happen with it. I had a student teacher who did this activity with a class the following fall. These were children who were getting ready to go to kindergarten. And I had a student teacher who did it with a class that was mostly 3-year-olds. And when they would shake the ball, it was like, oh, it's coming to me, it's coming to me. And they had no idea why. And they would be so excited, but it was just like magic to them. They didn't yet have that sense of control that these older children gained. So they really knew that you have to tip the box, that they could control who it went to and how. Whereas for the 3-year-olds, every move was a surprise. So here they're expressing wonder, they're asking questions, they're solving problems, so they know that they can tip it fast to make it go fast, or they can tip it slow. Again, that allows you, those language samples allow you to assess their learning. How can we make it go to Paul? They understand that direction and how they can control it. So then they decided they wanted to make it even really more big. And so they talked about we could do the big balls or the bouncy balls. So here this is part of a book that we made about this experience, and this was how they captured it. We cut the paper, we taped the paper, we put plastic all over the balls. We had those textured playground balls and a basketball that have a lot of texture, so we covered them in plastic wrap. If you use the smooth balls, you wouldn't necessarily need to do that. We decided practicing without paint was a good idea, and we decided to do it outside. We did some skill development. Roll means stay on the ground, throw means in the air. We have to roll. So again, observation skills. They can see we just started because there's not much line. Then I want you to take a look at this little girl. She was active and engaged throughout the entire time and never touched the ball once. We all know children have different comfort levels with getting their hands messy. And so this child was focused, she was talking, she was excited, and she was just keeping her hands back and letting the other kids push the ball back and forth. Here it was a windy day. You have to push it really hard or it doesn't go enough because it was windy. And if you can see her tongue sticking out, she was really pushing hard. Then it's just a little side bit of information. This child figured out it's getting kind of brown. Lots of colors make brown. So he's showing his knowledge of color mixing. So as you're thinking about documenting children's learning through the various methods that you all use. Here's a way for it to go. And then we made it really, really big. This gives you an idea of the scale of what we did. So we recorded the process for children to then later narrate. We took photographs, they made it into a class book with the children sorting out the photographs and adding the captions. We did observations and anecdotal notes for documenting their learning, and then took samples of their work. So all of this allows children to share with each other and to share with their families what they learned through this process. And then they decided, we brought in a bowling ball. It was like, what could you do with this? And they wanted to do that. They tried dipping it in paint and realized very quickly that the ball was too heavy and it was too slippery for them to dip it in and out of the paint. And these two little girls, and we unfortunately didn't capture it in photographs. These two little girls went, I know, and they ran inside and they got paintbrushes. And so they would paint the bowling ball, push it, paint the bowling ball, push it, paint the bowling ball, and push it. And so it was a combination of lines and little footprints that went across the final project with that. So what they did was use real materials in active ways. They brought in these elements of STEAM. I mean, I'm sure you can all imagine the amount of language that was going on as they were working through this. So what I'm going to show you now are a collection of activities. Some of them are one-time activities. Some of them are part of a larger project that may trigger your own ideas or give you some ideas for what you might do in the future. So this first one was part of a larger study of dirt and their environment. I worked as was part of a team that had a National Science Foundation grant with University of Texas, Austin, and we were looking at what 4-year-old children know and can do in science. And in Texas, at that time, their preschool programs were clearly divided. The 3-year-olds were in one class and the 4-year-olds were in another class. And so this grant allowed us to focus on working with the 4-year-olds. And so they were collecting soil samples at school. They were bringing in soil samples from home. Families were helping them bring in soil samples from other places so that they could just see all the different kinds of soil that there was around where they were. And here you can see them really carefully observing. Now, they do look like little scientists here. They're taking it seriously. They might not describe this as, oh, it was so fun, but it's clearly very satisfying to them. I mean, these guys look like, adult researchers examining their materials. So then the teacher decided to add water and make mud. And how does the different soil samples look with different amounts of water added, and just sort of playing with the idea of mud. And as she was doing that, she remembered how, as a child, dirt stained her clothes, and her mother would tell her, "Don't sit in the dirt." This is because in Texas, there's a high iron content in the soil, so you get that red clay. And so she collected a lot of the red clay and made mud and decided to try tie-dyeing. And so she wadded up t-shirts and put them in mud, let them soak, and then took them outside. And here they are drying out. And so the children are watching the change. How does the color change when it goes from wet to dry? What's happening to our t-shirts? And then here is the results. So the teacher was like, yeah, next time I'll soak them longer and make sure that more of the shirt's exposed, because the mud doesn't soak through like a liquid would soak through. But then she said, but that's how you learn. And so they each had their own Texas t-shirt. Just kind of looks like cowhide. We told them that. But again, it's science plus art equals tie-dyed t-shirts. Okay. Then I want to talk a little bit about the idea of digital cameras. I know many of you have iPads in your classrooms. One of the advantages of digital cameras is that they're small, they fit in a pocket, they're lightweight and easy for children to carry around. And so it might be something to consider. One of the teachers we worked with wrote a grant. I think she wrote it to Kohl's and got a grant, got 6 cameras. And she really taught the children how to use them carefully. All of them come with a loop that she taught them to loop over your wrist. You always put that over your wrist. So if you let go of the camera, it doesn't drop on the ground. She has had those cameras for 4 years now. Only one has been broken, and that was by a parent who didn't use the loop. She also talks to the children about this is something special. They love being trusted with something that's fragile, something that they need to be careful to handle. She also stores them on a piece of fleece, and she thinks that just having them stored on something soft like that is just a tactile reminder of this is something that we have to take care of. But they're easy to take outside and easy for the children to use to take pictures of anything they want to take pictures of. So again, here you can see he's got the loop around his wrist and they're concentrating on what they're doing. They start out with just playing around with the camera. And one of the first things that a lot of them do is they get nose shots. They take pictures of their feet. When adults are around, and research has been done on this, when adults are around, children tend to take fairly typical pictures. When they aren't around, they tend to take pictures of underneath and behind and parts of things, higher up angles, what's at the top of the room. So another way that some teachers have gotten digital cameras is asking families that when they upgrade to a better camera to donate their old cameras. Some places let children and families check out cameras so that they can take pictures at home and share them with schools. That's not as crucial now that most families have cell phones that can do that. But that's another option that doesn't use any of the family's time on their phone. So one thing that came out of technology was at our early childhood center on campus, there are bird feeders by a window in most of the classrooms. And they had this mystery. There were footprints under the bird feeder that weren't bird footprints, and they were coming into school every morning with the bird feeder either empty or knocked down on the ground. And so they had a student worker who brought in a night camera. And so they had the question, what's coming to our bird feeder at night? And they saw that it was a possum. So a fun thing to do, to start collecting photographs of animals. Families could text you a photo that they took of a family pet or a squirrel or a bird or an insect. And you could make it into either an ebook or a print book to share with families. So technology plus science equals a mystery solved. Then this is taking a look at engineering. We've got vinyl guttering here that's not very expensive to buy at Rural King or Lowe's or wherever. Here are the ever popular tubes, toilet paper tubes and paper towel tubes that you can either keep in tubes or you can cut in half lengthwise to make troughs. The nice thing about taking some of these things outside is it increases the variety of things that they can use. There's that space around them. You don't have to worry about them knocking things over. And so here's a simple challenge that they're playing with rolling balls down here. But what if they want a stick to go all the way down? Can they change the angle to make a stick come and land in the tub? What do they have to do to make a pine cone go down? So think about these low-cost materials that allow you to do these sorts of things with children. So math and science and engineering make cool ramps. So then this is part of a larger project. The classroom really got interested in the land artist, Andy Goldsworthy. And he uses natural elements to create sculptures, some of which are permanent and some of which are completely temporary. And so they brought in the books that showed his work and watched some videos on YouTube. His name is Andy Goldsworthy. Awesome videos on YouTube if you want to see his work. And so one of the things that he did was create floating sculptures in water. And so these are storage box lids filled with a shallow layer of water for them to float these natural objects on. They did the same thing with sand and boxes. They went outside and did additional sculptures, bringing in more elements. Here, they each had their own tray. Science areas often become, especially in the fall, sort of this little pile of leaf crumbs and acorns. If each child has their own container, they're in charge of what goes in the space, what comes out of the space, how they arrange it. And so it gives them a sense of ownership and thoughtfulness when they collect things on a fall walk, as opposed to just random piles of things. So natural materials plus children can equal artistic expression. So we're going to take just a short break right now. Can we do just a 5-minute break? Karen, are you?
Don't have a break timer in Zoom or anything, but we can surely
okay.
take
So
a break.
right now it is on my clock. Let's come back at right around 4:55. That'll give people just a real quick 5-minute break. Does that work? So I'll say I'm back in 5 minutes, and we'll go from there. Okay, let's come back together, and we're going to talk a little bit about children learning about where they are. So this is doing a little bit more focus on the outdoors. So part of what we want to do is help children appreciate the environment where they are, no matter where they are. I became really passionate about this when I was presenting at a conference, and somebody in the audience said, all I have is a parking lot, and I can't do it. I was doing a whole presentation on children and nature, and she said, all I have is a parking lot. My kids can't do anything. And it was the group that I was speaking to was it was an audience of around 200 people. They were all sitting at tables. It was at a conference, and so I just stopped right then and said, okay, everybody at your table, start generating a list of what you could do to connect children with nature if all they had was a parking lot. And boy, did we come up with some good ideas. because we don't ever want any child to feel that where they are has nothing to offer. Certainly some environments are richer than others, but every place where they are can look at the soil, as these little guys are doing, can look at the sky, can talk about weather, can talk about the puddles that happen wherever they are. You can plant things in pots. So every place we can find something that is interesting and worthwhile. And I think that's just a really critical thing for all children to understand, that where they're spending a significant portion of their day matters. So this child is at our early childhood center, a richer natural environment that's sort of on the edge of a prairie. You can see right across the river from St. Louis, Cardinals sweatshirt. This child is looking at milkweed. They're on the flyway for the monarch butterflies that are transitioning right now. Here, a child's in the sand area, getting that experience of what's the difference between sandy water and wet grass and mud. One of my colleagues decided to bring in this sort of stump piece or log piece to the children. And we thought, oh, they'll have a good time hammering nails. Children really like to do that. And they got inspired to start connecting all of their nails, first with string. Then they started decorating it with the leaves that were around. Then they brought branches from the willow tree that's at the edge of their play area. And so our adult idea of let's hammer nails into a stump became a much richer idea as the children made those STEAM connections of art and design and nature and the technology of hammer and nails. So this is part of our outdoor space, and we are really, really lucky that we've got prairie and woodland around. And I'm going to take just a few minutes to do a little commercial on the value of children spending time outside. There's been enough research that's been done now over a period of close to 20 years that has identified that spending time in nature, and it doesn't have to be this kind of big nature, but just spending time outside can reduce the symptoms of ADHD for some children and adults, as well as medications, not for all, but it has a positive impact. It also has a significant impact on anxiety. And so now when so many of us are feeling the anxiety of the last year and a half that we've spent in this strange world, that time outside can bring the pressure down. It's also, there's been a rise in nearsightedness, and sort of the first response was it's all those children spending that much time on technology. But what is being discovered is that they're not getting enough sunlight, that sun affects eye growth and the shape of the eye, which determines how well you see at a distance. And in some parts of South Korea, 90% of high school students need glasses. And so they're now mandating a certain amount of time outdoors for recess to address this crisis in nearsightedness in children. And so it's something just interesting to find out more about. One of the positive things that's come out of the pandemic is many places across our country and around the world started experimenting even more with outdoor classrooms and discovered positive outcomes for that. And many plan to continue them. So that's something that you might want to look into. Here are some books that if you're interested and want to know more about this, these are Last Child in the Woods, the 10th anniversary edition, really talks about the impact of what the author describes as nature deficit disorder, of what happens to children when they don't get enough time in nature, what happens to us as adults when we don't get enough time in nature and or enough time outside in daylight. It disrupts sleep and all kinds of things. The Nature Fix has a lot of really interesting research on both adults and children. Just interesting things about the impact on reading levels of children. Balanced and Barefoot, if you only read one, those of you working with this age group, Balanced and Barefoot would be my first choice. That she really looks at the impact of lack of time outside playing, how it's affected children's, particularly their motor development, their attention, their ability to focus, why so many children can't sit cross-legged for any length of time anymore, why children fall out of chairs, that kind of thing. So just something that you might want to take a look at. But the big idea is that nature and children plus extended time provides meaningful learning and healthy children. This slide is about just one child. So this little girl had an IEP goal to be able to sort objects by color. And anytime her teacher would get out the teddy bear counter, she would sweep her arm across the table and knock them on the floor. She was a child who had significant motor delays and very, very limited language. So then her teacher brought in a collection of natural materials. And this is what that child did. So that child can clearly sort objects into discrete categories. There was something about the texture, the weight, the interest of these materials that engaged that child in a way that that the teddy bear counters didn't do. She didn't send me a photograph of this, but she also said that at another time, the child sat at a round table with those rocks and put all the light ones, made a circle with the rocks around the edge of the table and put all the light ones on one side and all the dark ones on the other side. And so there was something about that fresh materials with different textures, different weights that engaged her. So something to consider. So the right materials and the right child can equal learning success. Here we're getting into the area of mathematics, and children are using balances to determine, what does this tool tell us? Which one's the heaviest? Then this particular group really got into wanting to make them even. And so they kept putting rocks on one side and then the other and you can see they're engaged. This is something that's really challenging to them. And then I love this slide. It was picture day, so that's why he's dressed up. But did you see how he used engineering to make his balance even? So math and rocks equal learning about tools and engineering. So he used his resourcefulness to get his results. Here is, again, part of our Texas group of 4 children. And so they were looking at this is part of a larger inquiry on force and motion and how things move. So they gave the vehicles a push, and right away you can see a graph. You can mark it with chalk. They could count out the steps, take the photograph. But this is a way for them to document their observations and to learn more about these vehicles. So cars and motion plus math equals physics and measurement. So here we're going to look at some ways to document learning. the Austin School District has this awesome thing where teachers can check out pets for a month. So they can check out giant cockroaches, they can check out a parakeet, they can check out snails, they can check out a tarantula, they can check out a guinea pig. And I know you're all jealous, because wouldn't it be nice to just have that pet in your classroom for a month? You're not making a 3-year commitment to a guinea pig. But here you can see these children are making careful observational drawings of what they have in their classroom. It also is impacted by what materials you give them. So different materials help them attend to different things. So giving them this plasticine oil-based clay, this child really focused on color. Given a Sharpie, this child really focused on detail. And look, here are how the feathers are on the pattern of the feathers are on the parakeet. Look how that child was able to replicate that. So think about offering different materials for different contexts and see, what different information emerges. Here we are back at the Early Childhood Center where they have the bird feeders, and they're using a combination of photographs, drawings, markers to document their observations of who comes to the bird feeder. Here you can see this child is really engaged and just fully absorbed, and they're using the hoop to say, let's just focus on what you see in this area to help. Much as we used our hands at the beginning, this is a way to help children narrow their focus and what do you see. And so here's the large bug that this child saw and drew. Here, this was part of a study on rocks. He was looking at this rock carefully and then going back to his drawing, looking at the rock, going back to his drawing, and did a careful observational drawing. This is different than creative art. So one thing I had a student teacher did this great experience with kids that, this time of year in the fall, pumpkins are coming in, and brought pumpkins into the classroom. And she wanted children to make observational drawings of the pumpkins. And so before they even started drawing, she said, let's see how many different colors we can find on the pumpkin. And so they saw various shades of green and yellow and orange and brown. And what color was the stem, what color was the side, what colors did they see on the bottom. And so doing that kind of observational drawing can result in a beautiful piece of art, but the focus is on observation and accuracy as opposed to creativity. So, that doesn't mean that another time a child could draw a creative drawing of a pumpkin and make it whatever color they wanted. And I think that's helping children distinguish the difference between those two kinds of thinking. Documenting helps children remember what they saw. Here are the caterpillars and then the butterflies. It's powerful to go back and say, remember when we did this a couple of months ago. This is part of the things that they can check out, a snail. But again, look at her detailed drawing of that snail. So drawing plus observation and inquiry equals art and documentation of learning. So here, this child is using a digital microscope. The digital microscope here now sells for about $200 and is actually kind of complicated for children to use, but it shows what is the child is seeing here shows up on the screen of the computer, and so children can share. And I actually did contact the Eckers folks to see if using digital photography or digital microscopes with either the computer screen or the big white screen in the classroom, whatever version you have, the smart board counted as screen time. And they said, no, it didn't, because they were using it in the same way that they would use a microscope. And so if the children are engaged in making these observations with a digital microscope, that didn't count. So they can really see, they can take photographs, they can set it to take photographs every 10 minutes. I've had teachers who've documented the hatching of an egg or the emergence of a butterfly. There is a $60 version called the Zoomy, and it's durable enough that the Missouri Botanical Gardens uses it, and they last at least 3 years there. So when you think about all the people coming through the Children's Center at the Missouri Botanical Gardens, if it lasts that long, it's a pretty tough tool. So if you just Google Zoomy digital microscope for kids, that might be something that you might want to think about adding to your classroom tools. So with that digital microscope, children became, in this classroom, really interested in worms. And we know that children write about things that they love. And this little girl wrote about, I explored worms. And again, she's a 4-year-old. We want to give them enough time to actually do things, to talk about the things in front of them. So this classroom actually was a classroom that there were 17 children on 11 different languages. And so this teacher really got engaged with these sorts of hands-on activities because there was something right in front of the children that they could talk about. That was how I got into science in the first place, when I was teaching early childhood special ed, and I had lots of children who had very limited language, and these hands-on science activities were highly engaging and gave children things to talk about. So here you can see they use the digital microscope. They can see that worm up close and see all of those details. And so here they did drawings. They made worms out of clay. They made giant worms out of cardboard. And when you change the scale, children can add different kinds of details. They did dramatic reenactments of worms moving around in the dirt and outside. So technology plus worms and curiosity equals discovery. So here we're back to one of the schools that had pretty limited resources in terms of contact with nature as such. Again, the Early Childhood Center on campus, they see deer and wild turkey all the time. This space had a lot of rocks, gravel, blacktop, dirt, and weeds, but they had a really innovative teacher, and she was always coming up with things. So these children are using recycled bottles to find out which one squirts the farthest. These children are putting out different kinds of food. They've brought them out in this container. They're going to lay those little dishes out to see what foods the birds and bugs want to eat and what they don't eat. These children found a roly-poly. And again, look how focused they are. Roly-poly or pill bug, whatever you call them, of really, and look how relaxed they are. There's that intention and attention and focus, but their body is also relaxed. And I think that's, again, what can happen with some of that outdoor time. Here, they're using a magnifier box where they can put something in the box and be able to examine it more closely. I had one teacher who shared with me that she had a little girl who could never focus on anything more than a couple of minutes. And she took a magnifier outside and she spent 20 minutes watching ants and grass with that magnifier. That just, she became zoomed in and focused. Another teacher shared that she had a child who was an English language learner who she could not get engaged with books. And it was spring and she was still not getting her engaged with books. And they went outside and sat in the grass and read the book in the tall, tall grass. And she said, all of a sudden, it was like the little girl connected the grass that they were sitting in to the grass in the book. She sat there, even after the children were told they could go play, she sat there and looked at the book over and over while she was outside. And then just sort of became, it was like it opened the world of books to her. So those are the kinds of things that can sometimes happen when children are outside. Here, children are trying to decide what's the best rock to write with. You don't have to have a lot of nature to be able to do that. Here, they're looking at collections of things they found through a tripod magnifier. So a blacktop only playground and classroom tools and a resourceful teacher can lead to interesting outdoor investigations. You don't need to be in the middle of a prairie or a forest to be able to do that. So we come back to the science and the characteristics of science and technology, whether it's exploration or using a cell phone camera zoom as a microscope, having children zoom in and zoom out with their iPad. They can use engineering to change something that rolls into something that doesn't roll, or vice versa. They can use the arts to explore and to document the things that they're learning. All kinds of mathematics as they think about and organize the materials that they're doing. So we have so much to do and so little time. Think about starting small. So I'd like for you to put in the chat, what's one thing that's a takeaway from all of the things that are shared that you think you might want to try in your classroom within the next couple of weeks? So just take a moment to write. So lots of ideas, working with insects, indoor gardening, doing things with cameras, the cars in motion inquiry, and that could easily be integrated into a ball study that you're doing of comparing how balls move to how the cars move. Expanding on the marble roll as part of the ball study. Sorting beyond the basics, that can be really engaging. Making those connections in nature, taking cameras outside to do that. Drawing before and after observations, using more technology with the students. Students love to record each other doing interesting things. And sometimes that can be a way, if you have a child who is struggling to engage with other children, you have them be a recorder to take pictures of interesting things that their peers are doing, that can sometimes be a point of entry for them. And I would encourage you to think about writing grants. I had a grad student who worked at Sam's Club, and she said they had grant funds that almost always went unspent, that were specifically designated for teachers. And so most of the big box stores, whether it's Walmart or Target or Kohl's or Sam's, do grants. I used to also get funding from a lot of the I'd go be the guest speaker at Kiwanis or the Lions Club or something like that, I very often could get donations of things for specific reasons. Observational drawings with trees. Reduce, reuse, recycle. So cardboard rolls as telescopes or the ramps. Yeah, there are all kinds of things that you can do with. My granddaughter once told me, introduced me to her friends as, this is my grandma. She teaches teachers and she makes really cool stuff out of garbage. So if you can get to the point of making really cool stuff out of garbage, I think that's awesome. Okay, lots and lots of interesting ideas of how to move forward with this. So I want to share this final image here. And this child was 5.5. And I was teaching a group of 4 and 5-year-olds, and we were outside, and we happened to catch a spider making a web. And so we just stayed out past our normal recess time and watched that happen. And when we went back inside, this little boy named Joshua drew this spider web. And he was one of those high action, rough and tumble kids, loved to play in the blocks, loved to build something in the blocks and knock it down. But he started writing this himself, and then he ran out of steam and I finished writing it for him. But it is, spider webs are like beams from top to bottom, spreading quite clearly, shooting like an arrow everywhere. To me, that's science and art and poetry. I had no idea that he had that in him. But it was that time to wonder, that quiet time we spent watching, that allowed him to share that eloquence that he had, that I just thought was incredibly beautiful. So I want to take a moment to thank the early childhood staff at SIUE, the director who allowed me to take a lot of pictures there, all the teachers across Texas who shared their photographs, and teachers in other classrooms I've visited that allowed me to give photographs to share today. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Karen, it's back over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Dr.